Well, good evening. I just lost my audio. There we go. Good evening, Chapter 288. Welcome to our first ever second time virtual meeting. Again, this week, if you have any questions throughout the briefing, Matt's number is on the phone, on the screen rather. You can call him and he'll get your message, ask the questions, but do it a bit early. There's about a 30-second delay between what we're doing here and what you're actually seeing due to transmission on the internet. And I'm trying to change slides here. Give me 1 second. Okay, thank you, Matt. I want to say thanks to Matt Simmons, Dave Baldwin for their help with this production again. It's really a lot of work to make this happen. And I also want to thank all of you who sent us your comments after the last meeting last month. One comment that we took seriously was when someone had a question, you all out there couldn't hear it because Matt would ask me and I would answer Matt. So we've corrected that a bit now. So Matt has his own microphone, and when he gets a question, he'll be announcing the question.
Actually, John, we have a question now.
You have a question already, Matt?
Yeah, we already have a question. Yeah, just came in.
Okay, let's hear it.
Yeah, the question is, let me see if I get it right. Why are you bald?
Why am I bald?
Yes, that's the question.
I have to think about that for a minute. Let me think about that for just a minute. Okay, I know why I'm bald. Because if I had hair, I'd look like this. So I think I'm better off staying bald. Raise your hands out there. I see you. Everybody out there wants me to stay bald. That's good. So I don't know who asked that question, Matt, but there's your answer. I need to stay bald. Anyway. Yep, those were your glasses that I dropped, Matt. Anyway, let's move on here. Whoops, why is that going so fast now? There we go, sorry about that. Hey, tonight's agenda, we've got a few things of chapter happenings. There's not a lot going on. Have more submissions for the virtual tour. Scott Seagrave is going to talk, and then Randy Mahoney is going to talk. I'm not advancing, Matt. There we go. Check out our website, EAA288.org. Rick Weiss is always adding some great content to that. Really some interesting material on there, some good links to other material. So check out the website when you can. I couldn't resist this. This was a month ago. We were all stuck, quarantined, couldn't visit with our friends. And there's dear old Stu trying to learn how to play Mahjong. The good news is Stu's flying again. So I think most of us are flying again. The calendar. Not much going on in the calendar as far as aviation events around Chapter 288. Christmas, Thanksgiving, I think we're still going to have those this year. But the event calendar for Chapter 288, no VMC, no IMC. We're discussing this today. I think this virtual meeting is probably going to be a thing for a while. So we just don't have a whole lot going on in the chapter right now. Any other events? Thought I took that out of there. Sorry. We talked a little bit last week about training while waiting. That's on our website. I'm going to go through these real quick. There are some open book type question materials on the website. When's the last time you did a weight and balance? When's the last time you actually calculated range at 7,500 feet? So this is just an open book POH test. It's one we used in the Civil Air Patrol. Here's another document. It's open book, regulations. When's the last time you looked at something like this? Here's a guidance for a biennial flight review. Do some slow flight, do some steep turns. You can do a little bit of training while you're out there. So this information is on the website if you'd like to do it. It's all open book. And of course, if you really want to do some training, we've got a great simulator. Jack Morey runs that sim for us. The information for the sim is on the website again. So you can find an instructor. I wish it looked like as nice as that one, but it actually is a really good simulator. So there's lots of opportunity for doing some training while we're kind of standing down or not quite as active as we were. I've been working on my 2-year flight instructor renewal online. Took some of this information from this. Types of maneuvering accidents. If you look at stall, loss of control, still the greatest problem we have in general aviation. We're still stalling airplanes, losing control. Hitting a wire, well, I didn't think we did too much of that, but apparently we do. And mountains and canyons. But still, if we could eliminate that stall, loss of control, we'd have a lot safer system. Type of pilot-related accidents, that's look at the landing. Way above anything else. Most accidents happen in the landing phase. I think if there's one good piece of information here, it's weather-related accidents. They seem to be going down. And it's probably because all the information we have at our fingertips now with ForeFlight, internet, and everything else. So hopefully the information we're getting from weather, ADSB, and whatnot is really helping us reduce the weather accidents. But if we could reduce that loss of control on landing, we'd be doing a good thing. Big TFR coming up this coming Wednesday, really big. If you haven't seen it, make sure you look it up, look over it. It's 18,000, below 18,000 feet and a huge radius of the launch that's coming off on Wednesday. I'm new to Florida, so I guess this used to be a typical restriction when they launched the space shuttle. This is my first episode at it. So it really affects us here at Spruce Creek. I'm not going to tell you how you can come and go, so please read the NOTAM because it may change. There is an opportunity at Spruce Creek to come and go depending on which way you're going, but there are a lot of requirements. So please, check the NOTAMs. Okay, let's get into the virtual tour. Last month we said, what's in your garage? Because a lot of these projects started in people's garage. So we used that theme last month. Then we realized, well, what's in your living room? That was Craig, of course. He's got part of his airplane in his living room. So the more I got into this and more people submitted airplanes and write-ups to put into this, I figured really it's what's in your toy box. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I really appreciate all of the input that we got because it makes the program interesting. Lots of interesting things going on out there. In no particular order, Bob and Jan Kohler, they're our Chapter 288 Snowbirds. They're back in Lafayette, Indiana right now, and they sent a few pictures of what's in their toy box. Check this out, a 1961 182 D model. It's probably the only D model with a 3-bladed prop, but that thing looks brand new, and think about this, it's almost 60 years old. And when they're down here in Florida, they have a heated hangar, so they let one of their friends keep a Champ in the hangar. Belongs to a good friend. He wanted space in the heated hangar while they were gone. So that's their toy box. Now, what's a toy box without a project? So Bob is working on this project for another friend of his. It's a PA-28 Cherokee 235 horsepower. And there's a couple of days' work left on that. So that's in their toy box. Oh, I thought Keith might like this. Also in the toy box, Bob is working on a Ford 8N tractor. Matt Dunkel, Deb Cloud, they have an RV-12 project going on over here in one of the hangars in Aces Alley. At the start of the COVID crisis, Deb and I built a van sign project. So just to stay a little busy, they built that sign. JJ and his son helped them put the wings on and the tail on, which they eventually had to take off again. And the next step is going to be to attach the stabilator and the rudders, et cetera, et cetera. So that's an RV-12 that's in progress. Matt has a hangar door open frequently, and he says stop in if you see him. Roger Jennings did a engine change on his Zenith. So he installed a Viking 130 and got rid of the Jabiru. The Jabiru was originally 120 horsepower, probably problematic and required considerable maintenance. Yep. Thank you. So he replaced it with a Viking 130 horsepower. It's a Honda L15 Bravo 1 engine, 3-bladed carbon fiber propeller. Can't advance. Hang on. Okay. This project required major reconstruction of the airframe from the firewall forward. Roger sent me a lot of information about this, too much actually for me to put into the slides here. But he's He's very knowledgeable on this. If you have any questions, there's his email, November 264 Romeo Juliet at gmail.com. With the new engine, the takeoff roll is 175 feet, climbs at 1,200 feet a minute, economy cruise 130 miles an hour, max cruise 150. So again, if you want more information on this, contact Roger. He's got a really great package on this airplane. Bill Stockman has a Velocity 173 FGE. He received the kit July 97, took him about 4 years to finish it. He was in the Air Force at the time. His first flight was on September 5th, 2001. Bill took leave from the Air Force for the month of September 2001. He hoped to fly the 40 hours in 1 month. Look at the date, September 5th, 2001, first flight. What happened September 11th, 2001? So needless to say, he did not get his 40 hours done in that month of September. Great panel. It's got a great panel. Look at all the information, all the systems, the Garmin systems, the iPad, all kinds of great places to get information. But the really important stuff we use for masking tape. If you notice over there is the 122.725 written on a piece of masking tape. Who needs Garmin and an iPad? So anyway, this will cruise at full throttle 165 knots. A normal cruise is 75% is 155 knots. Flies the parent at 90, touchdown at 75. Somebody named Danny Mayer, he designed and built the first Velocity in 1985. In 1992, Velocity introduced the Velocity 173. Now, why do you think they called it a 173? Because it was one better than a Cessna 172. Take a look at this experimental. No, it's really not experimental. I'll give you folks a couple of minutes to see where this came from. I'll give you a hint. It's at 900 feet and it's doing about 140 knots. Anyway, that's Phil Merton's Augusta 109. It's very hard to get a good contrast on some of these pictures down when I put the text on the pictures, but this helicopter has two 650 horsepower turbines. Service ceiling is 20,000 feet. V&E 168 knots. Economy cruise 142 knots at 80% torque, sipping a measly 70 gallons per hour. It'll seat 8 small people or 6 real people. Holds 220 gallons of fuel. So really glad to have that one in the mix here. Looking at the panel again, it's single pilot IFR certified, autopilot capable of LPV approaches, weather radar, and strike finders. So it's an amazing helicopter, just an amazing machine. Glad to have it here. And what do you do with a helicopter? Well, you fly formation with your fixed wing buddies. So that's a nice picture of the helicopter leading a flight of 5, sorry. Oh, back up. This is a kind of a repeat from last month. This Greg Rhines T-34 was in the paint shop a month ago, and he had taken all the parts off the T-34 and painted them and worked on them individually. And the question was, how many parts can you remove from a T-34? And the answer was 88. So this T-34 that Greg was working on, it started out his career in the Air Force and ended up with the Civil Air Patrol. So Greg sent in these pictures are now just a couple days old. He says, I only have a few parts left, and yes, I know where they all go. So it's really, really, really looking good. And he probably will bring it home, I'd say in the next week to 10 days. The vertical tail ID pays respect to the fact this was the last T-34 in the Civil Air Patrol fleet. And it did its last cinder duty with the Albuquerque, New Mexico cap wing. So great paint job, Greg. Looking forward to seeing that airplane. There'll be no mistake in it when you get it home. That's kind of the spirit of aviation, EAA. You know, we fix things, we paint things, we share our hangars. There's really a spirit of aviation with EAA. Don't forget this, the builder's log. If you're building an airplane, it's free. On the website, you can record all your build projects. You can share your information. Again, the pictures I got from Craig Cousins on his airplane came right off the builder's log. So that's a great resource to have one from a headquarters basis. Rick Weiss is our webmaster. If you have anything for him, it's CAA288 webmaster@gmail.com. So check out our website when you can. Matt's number for a question, not why I'm bald, That's his name. And when you call in or you send him a text, please include your name. And remember to do it early due to the time delay. Okay, after me, first speaker tonight, Scott Seagrave. He's a Chapter 288 member, attorney, Spruce Creek, private pilot with instrument rating, owns an F-33 Bonanza, member of the Lawyer Pilots Bar Association, is a panel attorney for AOPA. And what's not on the slide here is he actually Lancer, right? Glassair? He was building a Lancer. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Scott. No? No. Okay.
Good evening. Okay, so before I get started, I thought first I'll wait till Matt tells me I can get started. And now I got the thumbs up, so that's good. I want to thank everybody that's put so much effort into making these things happen. I mean, John Foster, our EAA chapter president, Dave Baldwin, our landlord/purveyor of high-speed Wi-Fi, and quite the gracious host. And of course, Matt Simmons, producer, director, technical guru, and, well, stage mom to a degree. But before I get started into this, what I want to there was one little topic I wanted to cover that just probably hits a few people, but this is just something that's come up a few times in the last couple days in my office. I think everybody knows, or if it applies to you, you know, the FAA put out a note that they weren't going to enforce any expiring medicals from March 31 to June 30th of this year. And that's a real good thing. And obviously, they don't want people going to doctors, taking doctors' attentions away from treating patients and everything else with this whole situation going on. If you listen real close, though, to what I said, and if you read the rule, what they did is they're not enforcing them. They didn't extend them either. So the medical's still expired. It's just the FAA won't bring any actions against you for it. The reason that distinction matters is that doesn't speak for the insurance companies. And we've had a couple situations where people weren't sure, and we actually had one where they had to get a binder or a rider basically from their insurance company. So if you're in that category, just ring up your insurance agent and say, hey, I just want to make sure I'm covered, because if we fly without medicals, we know that's it's an insurance agent's dream in a way, because then they have excuses not to pay. Okay, so getting started, before I do it tonight, of course, I'm an attorney. I've got to give you a big old disclaimer. And you'll be able to read it right here, that all this information is educational and it's not lawyer-client, and only someone with specific information about your specific situation can provide legal services. And so this is our first little interactive quiz, which is kind of interesting in this scenario. But do you know what we call that in the legal profession? And again, this is something we put into contracts, and it gives you a way out of the contract. It's an easy way out, that sort of thing. Well, you've probably heard the expression before. It's a weasel clause, okay? Okay, so I guess that goes over better at Christmas time. I don't know, during the holidays. But anyway, a little bit of fun for me anyway. So tonight's agenda, what I'm going to talk about is different ownership structures. If you're buying an aircraft, what are the different options, and what are the pros and cons of each? And I'll talk about it briefly for the difference between U.S. citizens and non-U.S. citizens. Obviously, we have a good mix of both here at Spruce Creek. Tax implications. You know, we're going to talk about sales and use tax, specifically in Florida, the taxes and the penalties, you know, the carrot and the stick. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about if you take delivery in another state, some of the implications. People don't always understand what that is. And then real quick, I'm just going to talk about the closing process of buying an aircraft, and just a couple things. Number one is reviewing the contracts, things to look for. And also the use of escrow companies. I've got a couple good situations that have happened just in the last few weeks with these. And then we'll do Q&A at the end if we need to, or if I see Matt stick up his hand with questions coming in, we'll talk about it. So just if you have questions, send them over to Matt's number. And like John said, do it as early as you can, because there's a lag between you sending it and us being able to answer the questions here. Okay, so when we talk about ownership structure, there's a couple different factors we need to consider when deciding what structure makes the most sense. The first, and usually the most important that people want to talk about, is asset protection. Hey, with an aircraft, that can be a high liability entity, so if something happens, how can I best protect my assets, my estate, whatever? And, you know, that concerns all areas: bodily injury, certainly property damage, and the biggest one is usually the lawsuit and the legal cost because you know how those damn lawyers can be. The cost of operation. You know, if there are certain tax benefits to you, or if you're operating it within the cost of a business, or even if you're doing an entity, the cost of various entities is different. And then privacy concerns. You know, there's people out there trying to steal your information, maybe track you down, find out where you are. There could be privacy concerns, and there's ways you can do that, and the choice of entity factors into that. One of the other ones that's going to kind of be in all of this, and I didn't actually put it up on the slide, is also going to be the number of owners. It makes a big difference if it's a single person owning an aircraft or if you have multiple people owning the aircraft. Okay, so if we talk about liability, privacy, and cost concerns, all three of those, here's a guy that, you know, maybe hopefully was set up pretty well, because it doesn't look like the plane was too damaged. Certainly doesn't look like anybody's too excited, but you never know what's going to end up happening and what we're going to do. And then, you know, obviously our liability is always a question, something that's always in the back of our head. Okay, ownership structures for U.S. citizens. First off, what's a U.S. citizen? Well, an individual who is a U.S. citizen or a citizen of a U.S. possession is a U.S. citizen. These are all out of the FARs. If it's a partnership in which each member of the partnership is a U.S. citizen, that's considered a U.S. citizen. If it's a corporation or an LLC created under any U.S. state or possession, because they're state creatures of state law, not federal law, the president has to be a U.S. citizen, and 2/3 or more of the directors, members, or trustees, and 2/3 of the officers are U.S. citizens, and 3/4 the voting. And again, you know, these slides I'm sure will get posted or it's on the recording or whatever, so if you want to go back and look at them, feel free. But the point is, you can have some non-U.S. citizens involved in these entities, provided that you meet these criteria. Okay, the different types of ownership structures we can have. First, an individual can register it. I can just go to the FAA, buy an aircraft, register it in my name, and I'm done. What have I done from a liability point of view? Probably nothing. What have I done from a cost, business, taxes, you know, expensing point of view? Nothing. And what have I done from a privacy point of view? Again, nothing, because my name's going to be out there on the registry, and anybody can inquire on that and see it. Now, the key with this, though, is it's the cheapest, it's the most traditional, it's the most normal, and there's literally nothing wrong with it. We have a question.
Yes, Scott, we have a question. The question is, how much wood would a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood? And then it says he did ask any question. Ask for any question.
Okay, well, I'm going to try to impress you with that. Well, a woodchuck would chuck what a woodchuck could chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood. Hopefully somebody's clapping that's watching this, or at least laughing, you know. I mean, come on.
It ought to be Phil, because that came from Phil.
Okay. I owe you, Phil. Okay. So we could just register as an individual, and again, that's a very normal, typical way to do it. Nothing wrong with that. We can do a domestic trust. Typically, this is for, you know, people that we've put in estate plans for that are trust-based plans. They want to have the aircraft owned by the trust because it makes managing and selling after our passing or upon our incapacity much simpler and much cheaper. Not going to do anything really for asset protection, but again, it's a pretty good way to do it. Partnership. The only thing I'll say about a partnership, and I'll make this pretty clear, I just saw one of the guys over here laughing, but just to make this real clear, this is the absolute worst choice for anything. Not even just an aircraft, anything in general. If two people go out and start selling lemonade on the corner and don't do any business registration, that's a partnership. Each one is completely responsible for all liabilities of the partnership, you know, personal injury, running up expenses, mortgages, houses, whatever. So don't do a partnership. Just never do a partnership. A corporation. Now, a corporation, before LLCs got more popular, was really the way that most people tended to go with these. And the thought was the corporation is going to give me some asset protection, some sheltering, because they'll sue the corporation, they won't sue me. There's some truth in that, and there's some concerns with that. But what I'll do is I'll also talk about the LLC. And what I want to do is really cover both of these together because they have very similar ways in which they work. You know, if we use an LLC, what does it stand for? Well, it stands for Limited Liability Corporation. Well, that sounds like a good thing. Or Limited Liability Company, I'm sorry. That sounds like a good thing because I want to limit my liability, and heck, it's a company. But you have to dig down a little further and understand what you're limiting liability from. The limited liability in an LLC is from liability of other members of the LLC. So in other words, if we have an LLC with 2 members, let's use it for an aircraft, a perfect example, and someone goes out and they wreck a plane and there's some kind of liability generated off of that, some kind of a personal injury claim, you know, Morgan & Morgan comes a-calling or whatever, that non-operating member is not going to be responsible for the liability of the operating member, okay? So there's a good, basically, bifurcation, if you will, of the liability between the operating member and the non-operating member.
We have a question.
And we have a question.
What is the liability of a spouse in the event of an accident when the aircraft is registered to an individual?
That's actually a good question. It's really not going to be any different than, and again, it's going to depend on how assets are titled between the husband and wife. If she cracks up a plane, are his assets subject to her claims? Well, if they're joint assets, they quite possibly are. If they're singly titled assets, they're quite possibly not. So again, it's going to depend on how those assets are titled within the marital relationship. Back to the LLC, though, what we end up seeing with that and what it really is going to do is it's going to protect you from the liability of another. It's not going to protect you from your own liability. Really, nothing is going to. So if you go out and, you know, you're in a dual-member LLC and your action somehow leads to a claim or some kind of a cost to that LLC, you're going to be on the hook for that. The LLC is not going to protect you from that. It's the same thing as a corporation. I tell people, imagine it was Procter & Gamble, okay? If you're a shareholder of Procter & Gamble, you're not going to have responsibility for what the corporation does, and that's fine. But if you're a shareholder of Procter & Gamble and also a corporate pilot and involved in some kind of an accident or incident, you're still going to be responsible for your actions that led to that claim. So there's no real good way that that's going to shelter you from your own actions. And so when people come into my office and they want to talk about how to limit liability, my first answer is, before we talk about entity types and, you know, irrevocable trust and family limited partnerships and all these other things we can do, is how well are you insured? Because typically that's what we see is people are going to go and the claims are going to be to the insurance limits, whether it be an accident, a fatality, whatever. And the reason for it is it's controlled by the trial lawyers. And they're basically predators going out there and they're trying to make the easy strike. And the easy strike is to get with the insurance company, negotiate a settlement up to the limits, and then move on to the next claim. So that's typically what we see. Can they come after your own assets? Sure, they can. But it's not typically what we see. And in addition, it's important to understand in Florida, if you're a Florida resident, if your house is your homestead, your house, whether it's you or your spouse, is protected from creditor claims, okay? Same with pensions, 401ks, IRAs, annuities, life insurance proceeds, beneficiaries. Those things are all going to be protected as well. So depending on how your assets are structured, there may be less of a concern than you know. Again, it just depends on the specific circumstances. Another interesting thing about the LLC and the corporation, this is just a minor point, and I don't think it's really come to anything that I know of. Years ago, the FAA tried to espouse a rule, if you will, or an interpretation that says if you have a single-purpose LLC or a single-purpose corporation, which by definition means the only thing it does is own an aircraft, that's then a flight department. And if you're putting money into it, then that's compensation for flight. And so they've, as far as I know, especially in the GA world, I've never seen them try to enforce that. Doesn't mean they couldn't, but again, that just seems to fly completely in the face of the IRS rulings, because from an IRS point of view, we can open it up and just say, hey, this is for banking purposes only. It's not an operating entity. It's just a pass-through to me individually. And so, again, I think that's unresolved, but not something my airplane's in an LLC. Okay. Non-U.S. citizens, you can be a non-citizen corporation, which is basically where a non-citizen can be the sole owner and officer. And I thought this was pretty cool. As long as 60% of the flight hours are accumulated within the U.S., you can do that. And the whole point here is having a non-U.S. citizen owning an unregistered aircraft, which generally the FAA frowns upon. But this is one way we can do it, that non-citizen corporation. The owner has to be a corporation. They distinguish again between a corporation and an LLC. And there's a form you have to file with them every 6 months proving all the flights to show that at least 60% of them were accumulated within the U.S. And also, yeah, you can't have dual registration. It can be a trust. There are companies out there, and this is what I've seen most of the people in the creek do that do it, is they'll hire one of these trust companies. The trust company gives you the trustee. They operate it, and you control it. And you can be a voting trust. This is a little bit weird. It's just a U.S. corporation owned by non-U.S. citizens, and it has to meet those other requirements. President and two-thirds have to be U.S. citizens and the voting interest. Okay? So that's a quick run through, and we're trying to move things along here, so I'm not going to spend too much time. But again, if Matt interrupts me with some more questions, we'll potentially answer them. Some of the tax implications in Florida. You know, you've heard the term sales tax, you've heard the term use tax. They're basically mutually exclusive. You pay one, you don't have to pay the other. They're effectively the same thing. I'll show you what the differences are. Within a Florida sales tax, the Florida sales tax is due if it's purchased in Florida from a registered dealer. So if I am a Florida resident or a non-resident, I'm buying in Florida from a registered dealer, technically that sales tax is due. But if I'm a non-resident, if I live in Georgia, Alabama, whatever, they're exempt if certain conditions are met. And those include, okay, well, I'll talk about them under the use tax because they're the same ones. So Florida's use tax, so sales tax is basically a point of sale thing, right? It's something we're buying from a registered dealer. The use tax is without a dealer. So this applies to Florida residents and non-Florida residents. And I remember about 8 or 9 years ago, Florida got really serious. And of course, it was, you know, in the depths of the post-2008 economy. They got really serious and aggressive about enforcing this. And they had to back off some because they just got kind of ridiculous. But it applies to both Florida residents and non-residents if the aircraft stays in Florida for more than 10 days from the date of purchase. So if you have somebody come down and buy your airplane and they're going to stay down here for 2 weeks and then fly out, technically they owe Florida use tax. Okay? Not your problem as the seller, but certainly their problem as the buyer. If they bring it into Florida to do repairs, they have up to 20 days after the repairs to get it out of Florida. If it comes into Florida within 6 months of purchase and remains there more than 20 days, this is the one that was getting a lot of people because what would happen is somebody in Georgia would buy a plane in Florida, or they'd buy it in Georgia, not even in Florida, and then they would fly it to Florida to take it to Zephyr Hills to get an engine redone, and it would be there for a month. And then the Department of Revenue would come and say, hey, this plane, you bought it within 6 months, you've got it down here in Florida for more than 20 days, so guess what? You're a Florida resident, it's a Florida-based aircraft, you owe the use tax. That didn't go over real well, but again, they were really aggressive about that for a while. And then also, if it's in Florida, if you're buying an aircraft and it's here more than 20 days after the completion of flight training, then they would go and say the use tax is due. At any time during the life of the aircraft, if it's purchased in a foreign country, and brought into Florida at any time. So if you go to Canada and you buy a Canadian aircraft, base it in, oh look, we got a match slide. Let's go back. And base it in Florida, it's going to be subject to the Florida use tax. And again, these are, 6.5%, 6.75% taxes. Once again, here's Matt's phone number. So if you want to call and prank Matt, feel free. If you want to text him and ask him questions that he wants to pass on to us, feel free to do that too. And again, do it as early as you can because of the time delays involved in this. So one of the things I wanted to make sure people understand too, because I have a lot of people come into my office and, in a hypothetical world, I was thinking about buying an aircraft and registering it in Delaware, and I'm going to base it up there, and Delaware has no sales tax. Well, yeah, it doesn't. If it's going to be based here, it doesn't matter that Delaware doesn't have the sales tax. I don't care where the corporation is or whatever, and the Department of Revenue really doesn't care. So the question is, who wants to be looking over their shoulder? So if you do, and I know people in here that have gotten the letters from the state of Florida, and I know people that have had to pay some of these taxes and penalties. because they forgot to take care of the use tax. And just as an aside, when I bought my Bonanza, I bought it from a dealer on the field here. I bought it from a guy that had it based in Florida. I'm obviously based in Florida. I paid the sales tax. The sales tax was remitted to the county. And about 3 months after I bought the aircraft, I got a nice little notice of audit from the county. And we had to show them the records to prove that the tax was due on that. And that was based on the registration. But I can tell you, the Department of Revenue has people that are at hangars, at airports. I mean, Spruce Creek, hey, we're private. That's a different deal, probably a little bit bigger barrier for them. But I've definitely seen them and seen the results at some of the other airports. So anyway, what would come up? The tax due, the interest due on it. There's a mandatory 200% penalty. So if you had a $15,000 tax bill, it's mandatory that it's a $30,000 penalty, plus the 15 tax, plus the interest. They can fine you up to $5,000, 5 years in prison. That would have to be a pretty rotten case. But the point is, to me, and you know, everybody makes their own decision, but I don't need to be looking over my shoulder and worrying about that dropping at some point. Okay, considerations for other states. There's a flyaway exemption. I don't know if people have generally heard of that or not heard of that, but not every state allows you to, like Florida, to buy an aircraft and take it out of the state and be exempt from their sales or use tax. And so if you're buying an aircraft and taking possession in a state besides Florida, you got to be really careful to make sure you know what the flyaway exemption for that state is, okay? Some states, believe it or not, the aircraft has to be manufactured in that state. Well, that cuts down the options. Some based on aircraft size, some larger ones would be exempt, some in the smaller ones are exempt. An example, before I bought my Bonanza, I was looking at another aircraft that was based in Ohio. And I was going to buy it, but the problem, or the opportunity, the problem is I was going to have to go over to Indiana to take delivery of it. Because if I bought it in Ohio, I'd be liable for Ohio's sales tax because it was delivered in Ohio, regardless of where the transaction was processed. Taking it in Indiana, Indiana has a flyaway exemption, so I could just buy it in Indiana, split, and then I've just got to worry about the Florida use tax. Excuse me. So there are some states that have no sales tax. Okay, Alaska, Delaware, everybody knows Delaware, Montana, New Hampshire. Let's hear it for all the, yeah, John's over there cheering anyway, and Oregon. So they just flat out have no sales tax on anything. This is the one, you know, the Florida use tax still applies. If you buy it in Delaware, like I said, and bring it back here, technically the Florida use tax still applies. In some places, they have a sales tax, in some cases significant sales taxes, but the aircraft purchase is exempt from that sales tax. And it surprises me, this list of states. Massachusetts, Maine, New York, Rhode Island. Some of them aren't known for being low tax, low cost states, but yet they're obviously trying to encourage general aviation and the aviation industry. So I think that's a good thing overall. But again, Florida use tax still applies. Closing process. So I'm going to go through this real quick. In the contracts, you know, AOPA, EAA both have standard contracts out there. You know, things we want to look at, risk of loss. If something happens to the aircraft between the signing and the delivery, who's paying for it? The cost of the pre-buy, who's paying for it, who's doing it, where is it going to be done? The cost of repairs, what repairs are going to be done, and what's the definition of airworthiness? Who's going to define, you know, hey, I'll make the airworthiness repairs, fine. What's airworthiness mean? The delivery location and expenses, you know, who's going to pay for them, the delivery. In that case of Ohio to Indiana, who's going to pay to get the aircraft from Ohio to Indiana for me? And then the coordination of the closing process. You know, the funds, the registration, all that. Just a little cheap plug here for the AOPA Legal Services Plan. If you're a member of that, you automatically get free lawyer time for buying or selling, reviewing the contracts at no cost to you. And I think I did one of those either this week or last week. So that's kind of a normal thing. So if you are a member of the Legal Services Plan, make sure you know what you're entitled to, because there's a bunch of things you can do every year, and it won't cost you anything. You're already paying for it. Another thing, and this is kind of the last point I'll make here, is I encourage the use of escrow companies. They'll coordinate the entire closing process. They'll escrow the deposited funds. They'll conduct record searches. In a closing a client just did in the last couple of weeks, They weren't sure if they were going to use an escrow company or not. I kind of talked them into doing it. They did. And it turns out on the record search, there was a 30-year-old lien on the aircraft. And so that was something that was easy to take care of before the purchase. And it was certainly something the buyer wanted to know about before taking that liability on. They'll prepare the bill of sale, FAA registration. They submit the registration, disperse the funds. And I believe, I could be wrong, but one of them still is a partner with AOPA and gets AOPA discounts. So basically, that's all I had to say. That's all, folks. And I'm laughing because I just saw Matt looking at his cell phone and shaking his head, so I'm hoping that's not a nasty question. Okay, he says no, I'm good. So thanks for indulging. Thanks for listening. Any questions, let me know. And then I'm going to turn it, am I going to turn it over to John or to Randy? And so I'm going to turn it back over to John. Where'd you think it was going to go?
Thank you very much, Scott. Just one more second with me here. Again, Matt's number's available if you want to phone in a question. Next speaker is Randy Mahoney. Randy's a chapter member, international captain with American Airlines, flying the Airbus 330. He used to have a Bell 47. Now he's got a Black Ops Jet Ranger. So he zips around in that, and he's also the guy you see zipping around on that two-wheel Segway, and that's near and dear to me because that's invented by a gentleman from New Hampshire. So I'll turn it over to Randy at this time.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much, and thanks for the opportunity to present here. Tonight we're going to talk about major U.S. airlines and the 2020 SARS-CoV-2, Wuhan, COVID-19, whatever we're going to call it this week, crisis. We're going to talk about the past, present, and the future of aviation in terms of the airlines. I'm going to limit it somewhat because if I'm trying to talk about airlines everywhere, it's a little diffuse. And I'm just going to focus on major airlines here. So if I'm leaving somebody out, I apologize for that, but I'm just trying to illustrate some points. So you just need advance, please. Thank you. Okay? Got it. Thank you. A few disclaimers. As Scott has disclaimers, I'm the grandson of two lawyers, the son of a lawyer, and I can't help it. All the views are mine. They don't represent American Airlines, Allied Pilots Association, anybody else. The presentation's off the record, so please don't attribute anything I say as gospel. The statistics are as good as I could get them, but they're only as good as you can obtain, and right now, statistics are changing, so what I said today may not be true tomorrow. My background, currently I'm an Airbus A330 captain for American Airlines. I was former Piedmont Airlines, will always be Piedmont Airlines. It was then US Air, and then we bought American Airlines, and now we're all American. But I'm on a permanent leave of absence until my retirement in February.
So we have two questions.
Yes.
Well, actually, one's more of a comment. And the first one is suit, Randy.
Yes.
No.
No,
You're
it's not a
retired
suit.
now.
It's not a suit. I'm not wearing pants. No, I'm just kidding.
He's not wearing pants. My goodness.
I'm sorry. There are people here. I don't want to offend them.
And then the next question is, should Alan Norris wear a mask to watch this?
Alan Norris should always wear a mask. Alan Norris should always wear a mask at all times. And we won't get into why, but that's covered under medical privacy, and I can't do that. I'm a former naval aviator. I flew TA-4s, then EC-130s. Everything I flew is up on static display or in a museum somewhere. Didn't fly helicopters in the Navy. Unfortunately, I didn't have that fun, but I fly them now and enjoy them. Well, we'll talk about the past first. And this is a representation of major airlines in the U.S. prior to 1980. Deregulation was 78. I use 80 as a cutoff because that's when things really started to happen. Eastern, TWA, a lot of people have never heard of those airlines before, but Eastern was the largest passenger carrier in the free world, and now it's a memory. There were just a lot of airlines around, and this was pre-1980. If you look at today, these are the major airlines in the U.S. Now, this one is to scale. Previously, that was in the order of which I kind of liked the airline. You'll notice that American is somewhat small. No particular comment about that. Piedmont is very large, Eastern is large, United's large, Delta's large, good airlines. Today, we really have three huge airlines, American, Delta, and United, followed by Southwest. And Southwest is a great airline, almost as big as United, but a very, very different airline, different way of operating, really interesting place, really good. Alaska, JetBlue, Spirit, Frontier, Allegiant, and then Hawaiian, the smallest. The past was a very regulated environment. The Civil Aeronautics Board controlled routes, regulated a very slow, stable growth environment. So markets were dictated by the government at that time, not by market forces. All changed in 1980. Pre-2020, the consolidation of the big three was the big thing. Three big airlines plus Southwest. Southwest always going its own way. God love them. Always loved Southwest. Up until this year, pilot careers, everyone, I can't remember how many people have said, it is a great time to start an airline career. Thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of retirements from the big three for many years to come. Regionals have a flow-through agreement to the big three. Somebody gets hired at a regional, they get a startup bonus, sign-up bonus rather, upgrade to captain. I remember the best one was 13 months from hire at Delta to left seat of the MD-80 at the time. So things were moving really fast until recently. This is our chairman, Doug Parker, and I just love Doug's quote. When he said this, I think we all got a big indentation in our head by doing this, because nobody should ever say this. I don't think we're ever going to lose money again. We have an industry that's going to be profitable in good and bad times until it's not. Until we saw this. This is what JFK's departure area looks like at American Airlines Terminal. It's open by the way. You can walk in there, but there's nobody there. This is what Pittsburgh International Airport looks like. It's all loaded with U.S. Air airplanes. I flew a 330 in there. It's just kind of a sad thing when you fly a 300 and some odd passenger airplane empty. It was kind of fun though. Did a toga takeoff because, I think the runway was a little bit wet. It was, which means you have to use full power. I think they got a show on that one. That was fun, but it was bittersweet because the airplane's parked. Next place the airplane's going is the desert. Okay, these are depressing graphs, but I do have some good news at the end, so please bear with me. This is the start right here, and this is commercial flights tracked just by Flight Radar 24, and you can see there's a waterfall that starts about the 15th of March, and it just falls off. And that shape, that Niagara Falls shape right there, you're going to see that again. Right here, year to year, we see, again, about the 15th of March, we see the waterfall. It just drops off. I do want you to look at the end of that graph, which is about the 12th of May, and there's a trend there, and that trend is hopeful, but it's kind of scary looking. More scary graphs. These represent capacity versus how many people are on the airplane. Clearly, we started dropping capacity when demand dropped off, and that was back, I've got 15th of March. No demand, we ground airplanes, no sense in burning cash. You can see the gap between those. That is the gap in capacity. That represents empty seats. You can see before that, there's no gap. We've met demand with supply. Past that, there's a gap. The wider the gap, the bigger the cash burn. Right here, international operations, you see have been hit into the upper 90s. Domestic is up a little bit, but we're required to maintain service to a lot of markets because of the CARES Act. That expires the end of September, but we have to fly empty airplanes around for national security and humanitarian reasons. We have to maintain the service. That's not going to continue forever. Right here, future air travel, again, dropped way off the waterfall But if you look right about the first part of April, it's starting to inflect up a little, and that's good. Demand falls off, reducing cash burn, parking aircraft, reducing staffing, pilots, flight attendants, everybody, all the way across the board. I'll just tell you what we did at American, and if you look at United and Delta, they're fairly similar. We parked all of our 190s, all of our 767s, all of our 757s, all of our A330-300s parked permanently, full stop, not coming back. The Airbus 330-200s are put in, quote, long-term storage. That's not defined. Just means they can come out. They may be sold. They may come out. My guess is they probably will be sold. December, we had 13,800 pilots. June 2020, we're going to be dropping down to, we're taking 4,800 people on a leave of absence, 715 permanent. We're going to lose 8,280 pilots is going to be our final head count. Other airlines, Delta, they did similar to us, removed the MD-88, MD-90. 777's going away. I think they only had 18 of them, but they're rationalizing their fleet and downsizing. 13,100 pilots, similar to us. Planned head count in September, 10,000. Final head count next year, down to 9,400. Very similar pattern to us. United, a little different. They're being very vague about their plans. That may be a strategy. It may be just default. They're just not talking about it. December, 12,250, close to 13,000. In June, they're going to displace about 4,500 pilots. Scott Kirby, who used to be with us, has been hinting there are going to be more cuts after October when the CARES Act goes away. Planned headcount, they're looking at 7,700. That's from 12,000 to 7,700. That's significant. We don't know what their headcount's going to be next year, and they haven't discussed it. Regionals, not faring real well. 2 regionals out of business, Compass and Trans-States. Remaining regionals, flow-throughs are paused, and no hiring. Regionals are still operating. I've been told that when hiring comes back, expect the regionals to hire first. Hopefully that's true. All right, one very short lesson in Greek mythology about Pandora. Pandora was a gift from Zeus to Epimetheus. And she was kind of a mess, and she had this box, and it contained the troubles of the world, burdensome toil and sickness that brings death to men, diseases, and a myriad of other pains. Just a real nasty box. She got mad, and she opened the box and scattered the contents, and therefore humanity's evils were released to the world. But fortunately, that wasn't the end of the story. In the bottom of the box, there was something that didn't escape and remained with Pandora, and that was hope. And that is there, and there is a glimmer that hope is returning. However slowly, it's returning. Any of us that have, and most of us who have flown in nasty weather, you get through an area of storms, and it gets really dark, and it gets bumpy, and then boom, you burst out into clear air. Well, it's always darkest before you get in the clear air. So when you pass the worst part of the storm, you're almost in the clear. And I'm hoping, and I think that's where we're going to be. Going back to that chart again, look at the inflection. At the very end of that chart, it is going upward. There's an old saying, Warren Buffett actually says it. Net bookings actually are going to be rising here in May. Buffett said, the economy always takes the elevator down and takes the stairs back up. When the SARS pandemic is going to have a defined end. However it ends, that's up for debate. It's going to end however it ends. Viruses just don't keep the same rate of infection forever. It's physically impossible. It will end. If our government acts decisively to backstop survivable and enduring businesses, reemployment will occur because there's some place for people to go. As long as there's some place for people to go, that means they're going to get work, there's going to be demand. That's what the Federal Reserve Chairman said, and I agree with him. If people feel secure in their jobs and in their lives, they'll return to travel. They return to travel. Doesn't mean that they're going to take the family to Disney World because they're not going to have the money, but they might take a trip. And then later on, as things improve and their finances improve, they're going to do more and more, and travel will pick up. But it's not going to pick up immediately. It's taking the elevator down. It's going to take the stairs back up. It's going to be a matter of years. There's a guy named Kit Darby. He's been around for like 35 years. He started the FAPA, Future Airline Pilots of America. And he's not always right, but he is plugged in. And he gives a lot of hope. And he thinks that pilot hiring is going to recover to 80% within 12 months. I think that's overly optimistic, but I love optimists. Retirements are going to accelerate. You're going to get a lot of people like me off the top. And people are going to take early outs if they're offered. That's going to accelerate the need for pilots when demand returns. Regionals recover more quickly, as I said earlier, prompting strong hiring from the bottom. Somebody's got to fly the airplanes when demand comes back and travel returns. If you look at these pilot retirements, this again is from Ken Darby, there's 80,000 retirements coming up in the next 20 years. That's a lot of people. That's a lot. People have to fly the airplanes. His advice to people who are starting out in the industry is that a FAA examiner also echoed this, that people with the most experience will probably be on the top of the pile when hiring returns, because they're going to be a little more selective. If you've got more experience, you're probably in a better position. So stay focused on the long-term goal for those of you starting out with patience and persistence. Even if it slows your career, and this looks like a big deal, which it is, it's not going to be a big deal forever, and things will improve. And Kit says this, that if you love what you do, you're never going to work a day in your life. That's true. I love what I do with flying and other things as well, and I'm always interested to see what happens, tomorrow. So,
we have a question.
Sure.
Jan Kohler asks, Randy, do you have a feeling for international travel from Poland through Germany to the U.S. returning in June? Our daughter is trying to move back to Florida.
Well, Poland through Germany to the U.S. Well, I can say that international travel is probably going to be concentrated in the hubs, and Germany being, of course, the Lufthansa hub. Any partners of Lufthansa and Lufthansa will probably be the best way to return to the States, and it'll probably be through a gateway city like New York when that opens up, or even another city that you might not think of that may have air traffic opening up. But it's going to be regional in Europe, and it's going to be through one of the major, like One World, Star Alliance, and so forth, one of those hubs back to the U.S. Currently, we're doing, just for American, we're doing one international passenger flight. We're doing a lot of cargo. We're doing one international flight per day, and that's to and from London. And of course, London Heathrow is a very large hub for us with One World. So it's going to depend. I can't say what's going to happen in June. I wish I could. It's opening up slowly, but it is opening up. And all you can do is just check literally on a daily basis. That's what you can do. Any other questions, concerns? Oh, you're welcome. I'm going to turn it back over to John. Thank you so much for your attention. Hope you've enjoyed this. Keep optimistic. It's not going to last forever. It's going to get better. Thanks.
Thank you much, Randy and Scott. Matt, are you still in communication with Alan Norris?
Sure, I can be.
Well, I'm just kind of curious. I wanted to ask him what's a TFR. Well, I spoke about it earlier, so I thought maybe. Anyway, can you help me advance the slide here?
Yeah, I sure can.
Alan. Okay, here we go. It's not going. There we go. Anyway, Thank you all for attending tonight's virtual first ever second time. I have a feeling this is not going to be the last time. I'm not sure how long it'll be before we'll be comfortable sitting with 100 people in the same room. But listen, Chapter 288, do me a favor, do us all a favor. Fly safe, look out for one another. Have a great evening and a great month. We'll see you in a month from now. Thanks again to Dave, Matt, Scott, and Randy. Have a good night. Cut, Matt, cut. Get me off this thing. Okay, am I going now?